I drove 4 hours to her wedding. She saw me from the altar and walked the other way. I almost didn't go. The invitation had been sitting in my glove compartment for 3 weeks. I'd put it there the day it arrived because I wasn't ready to put it somewhere that meant I was going, and I wasn't ready to throw it away because that meant something too. So it lived in the glove compartment, under the car registration and an old gas station receipt. And every time I reached in there for something else, I'd feel it and close the compartment a little faster than necessary. Her name is Nora Callahan. Was Nora Callahan. She's Nora Whitfield now, as of a Saturday afternoon in April in a small white chapel outside Macon, Georgia. I drove 4 hours to get there. My name is Reed Calloway. I'm 33 years old. I teach high school history in Knoxville, Tennessee, which means I spend most of my days explaining to 16-year-olds why the past matters. And I am aware of the irony in that, given everything that follows. I got to the chapel 40 minutes early and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 of them. I told myself I was early because I'd made good time on I-75. I was early because I'd been driving faster than I needed to since Chattanooga, the way you do when you've decided to do something before the part of you that knows better can catch up. I found a seat near the back, left side, second to last pew, next to the aisle. I picked it because it was close to the door, and I didn't want to think too hard about why that mattered to me. The chapel filled up. Music started. The groomsmen walked out. Marcus Whitfield, the man Nora was about to marry, stood at the altar in a gray suit and looked like a man who had been waiting his whole life for this particular minute. He had kind eyes. I'd met him once at a mutual friend's birthday 2 years ago. He'd shaken my hand and said he'd heard a lot about me. I'd said the same back. Both of us were probably telling the truth. The doors at the back opened. Nora walked in on her father's arm. I'd seen Nora in a lot of contexts over 6 years. Studying at 2 in the morning with her hair in a knot and ink on her wrist. Crying in a hospital waiting room in November of our junior year. Laughing so hard at something I said that she'd spilled an entire cup of coffee and then laughed harder at the spilling. I thought I knew all her versions. I didn't know this one. She walked slowly. She was looking ahead, toward Marcus, the way you're supposed to look. Then, about halfway down the aisle, she did what brides do. She scanned the room, taking it in, looking at the people who'd come. Her eyes found me. I don't know what my face did. I'd been practicing a neutral expression for about 200 miles, and I thought I had it ready. But I don't know what actually happened when she looked at me, because I was looking back at her and I forgot to monitor myself. Something moved across her face. Quick. There and gone. She looked away. 2 minutes later, she leaned toward her maid of honor, said something I couldn't hear. The maid of honor, Simone, I'd met her twice, glanced back at me, not unkindly, just a glance, like she was locating something on a map. Nora didn't look at me again. I picked up my jacket from the pew beside me. I stood up. I kept my movements slow and quiet, the way you do when you don't want to disturb anyone, and I walked toward the back of the chapel, and I pushed through the door into the Georgia afternoon, and I kept walking until I reached my car. I sat in the driver's seat with my keys in my hand. The invitation was on the passenger seat. I'd taken it out of the glove compartment that morning, finally, after 3 weeks, and set it on the seat so it felt like I'd committed to something. I looked at it for a second. Then I put my key in the ignition. If you've ever driven a long way toward something you weren't sure you should be driving toward and arrived anyway, stay with me. Subscribe if you want to hear what happened next. Because the thing I thought that look meant and the thing it actually meant were not the same thing. Like this, if you've ever misread a moment so completely that you nearly made a permanent decision based on it. Leave a comment. I want to know, would you have stayed for the ceremony? 1 for yes, 2 for no. I need to know I'm not the only one who would have reached for those keys. I want to tell you about the 6 years, because the 4-hour drive doesn't make sense without them. Nora and I met the first week of college at the University of Tennessee. She was in my intro history class, sitting 2 rows ahead of me, and she turned around on the first day to ask if I had an extra pen because hers had run out. I gave her the pen. She gave it back at the end of class. That was it. That was the whole beginning. Except we ended up in 3 of the same classes that semester. And then we started studying together. And then she called me one Friday night because she'd locked herself out of her dorm and her RA wasn't answering and she needed someone to wait with her. And I walked across campus in October cold to sit on the hallway floor outside her door for 45 minutes while she told me about her family and her plans and the specific way her mother made her feel guilty for being far from home. I walked back to my own dorm at midnight, and I already knew she was going to be important to me in some way I didn't have a word for yet. Over 6 years, it became the 2 a.m. calls when her father got sick. The hospital waiting room in November. 3 hours, just the 2 of us, while her dad was in surgery, and she'd held my hand, and I hadn't moved my hand for 3 hours and hadn't thought about it once. The road trips. The same playlist we'd made sophomore year that we still played on long drives. The gas station outside Cookville where we always stopped, and she always got the worst coffee they sold and complained about it every single time and then got it again the next trip. Her saying, once, on a Tuesday night in the library, "You're the only person I can actually talk to." Me saying, "Same." Not saying anything else. That's the part I've been living with for 6 years. The nothing else. I'd built a whole architecture of showing up for her. The waiting rooms, the late calls, the drives, and I'd never once said the one thing that would have required her to respond. I told myself I was being a good friend. I told myself she was happy. I told myself that if she'd wanted more, she would have reached for it. And the fact that she hadn't was its own answer. The truth, which I understood somewhere around the Georgia state line, was simpler. I was terrified of a no I couldn't unhear. So I stayed in the space between nothing and everything and called it friendship. And she got engaged to Marcus 2 years ago, and I said all the right things, and I drove 4 hours to her wedding because I had told myself I was over it. The drive proved I wasn't. I'd stopped at the gas station outside Cookville. I'd bought the same terrible coffee. I'd driven the rest of the way feeling something I didn't have a name for. And now I was sitting in a chapel parking lot in Georgia, with my key in the ignition and a wedding invitation on the passenger seat. My sister had called 2 weeks before the wedding. She'd said, "Reed, just tell her." I'd said there was nothing to tell. She'd been quiet for a long time and then said, "Okay." The specific okay of someone who doesn't believe you and has decided to let you find out for yourself. If you've ever had someone tell you the truth you weren't ready to hear and you made them take it back anyway, leave a comment. Just one word. You know what the word is. I said nothing to tell, and I drove 4 hours, and I sat in the back of the chapel, and I had the keys in my hand, and somehow I still thought I was over it. Someone knocked on my window. I hadn't heard anyone approach. I looked up, and Simone was standing next to my car. She was still in her maid of honor dress, dark green, slightly out of breath, like she'd moved fast to get here. She looked at me with an expression that wasn't pity. It wasn't the soft, worried face of someone delivering bad news gently. It was the expression of a person who has been asked to do something and has opinions about it, but is doing it anyway. She knocked again, once. I rolled the window down. "She wants to talk to you," Simone said, "before it starts back up." I looked at her. The ceremony's paused? I said. It's paused. I thought about that. A chapel full of people, a man in a gray suit at an altar, a priest waiting. All of it paused. Simone, I said, what's happening? I genuinely don't know the whole thing, she said. I know she saw you get up to leave, and she said she needed 5 minutes, and she asked me to find you. I looked at the invitation on the passenger seat. Where is she? I said. Side door, Simone said. Around the back. I should tell you what I thought on the walk around the side of that chapel. I thought, she's going to tell me she's glad I came, and she hopes we stay close, and she loves me like a brother. I had prepared for that version. I had been preparing for it for about 3 years, the whole time Marcus had been in the picture. I had the response ready. I was going to say, I'm glad I came too. I was going to hug her. I was going to go back in and watch the ceremony and drive 4 hours home, and that was going to be the end of something. I had it all planned. She was standing behind the chapel against the white wall in her dress, bouquet in both hands, not crying. The Georgia afternoon was warm, the grass still green, some kind of flower blooming along the chapel wall that I couldn't name. She looked like a photograph of herself. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me when her father came out of surgery. The same specific quality of attention, like I was the thing in the room she was tracking. You were leaving, she said. Yeah, I said. Don't. She said it the same way she'd said, don't fall asleep in the waiting room, don't drive home in the rain, don't tell me it's fine when it's not. Like it was just a fact about what she needed. I stopped walking. She looked down at the bouquet. The stems were bent from how hard she'd been gripping it. She noticed and loosened her hands. I'm not going to make this into something it shouldn't be, she said. I know what day it is, and I know what I'm doing today. I saw your face when you stood up, and I couldn't let you leave like that. Like what? I said. She looked at me. Like you'd already decided you weren't going to see me again. The Georgia afternoon was quiet. Some bird somewhere. The sound of traffic from the road past the trees. Had you? She asked. I could have lied. I'd been lying by omission for 6 years. One more would have been easy. I was going to drive home and delete your number, I said. Clean cut. I thought it would be easier. Something moved across her face. Reed? I know, I said. 6 years, I know. She turned the bouquet over in her hands once. I knew, she said. Not everything, but enough. I could feel it sometimes. The way you'd get quiet. The hospital waiting room. She stopped. I told myself I was imagining it because I didn't know what to do with it if I wasn't. And then Marcus was there, and he was good, and he was steady. And I thought, you love him, I said. She didn't pause. Yes. I know you do. I've watched you for 2 years with him. I know what that is. She nodded. I'm not here to ask you not to marry him, I said. I wouldn't. That's not... I stopped. I just needed to get myself through the ceremony. That was the plan. I thought I could do it. You were going to leave instead, she said. It seemed kinder. To who? I didn't have an answer. She stepped toward me, not close, just closer. Can I tell you something? Yeah? I've been afraid since I got engaged that I was going to lose you. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort in it. Not because of what you feel, because of what I didn't say. Because I let things get complicated by staying quiet, and I was scared you'd get to a point where it was easier to disappear. She looked at the bent stems of the bouquet. I saw you stand up to leave, and I thought, there it is. That's the thing I was afraid of. So you stopped your wedding, I said. 5 minutes. A small sound, almost a laugh. I stopped it for 5 minutes. Simone looked concerned. Simone has been telling me to have this conversation for 2 years. I looked at the white wall of the chapel, the blooming thing along the base, some kind of jasmine maybe. What did you need to say? I said. She was quiet for a second. Then, that I know what you are to me. That I'm sorry I let it get to 4 hours and a back parking lot. That I'm grateful for every waiting room and every 2 a.m. call and every terrible coffee in Cookville. And that I need you to stay. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Not here. Not in some impossible way. Just don't delete my number. Don't decide to disappear. I know I don't have the right to ask that. I'm asking anyway. I looked at her for a long time. The sun was doing something specific with the light behind the chapel. The kind of afternoon light that makes things look like they're being remembered even while they're happening. I'm not going to disappear, I said. She let out a breath. Yeah? You're my best friend, I said. You've been my best friend for 6 years. That doesn't stop being true because today is what it is. She wiped one eye quickly, the way she did when she was trying not to cry and had already decided she wasn't going to let herself. I need to go back in. I know, I said. She reached out and touched my arm once, briefly, the way she had in the waiting room when the surgeon came out and her father was okay. Just a hand on an arm for a second, meaning something that didn't need a name. Then she walked back toward the side door. Simone was standing there holding it open. She looked at me over Nora's shoulder as she went inside. Her expression said, "Good." Like she'd been waiting 2 years for something to be said and was relieved that it finally had been, whatever form it took. I stood behind the chapel for another minute. Then I went back in and found my seat. Marcus cried when she walked back down the aisle. The good kind. The kind where his whole face changed and he didn't try to stop it, and the woman next to me put her hand over her heart because some things are just true when you see them. I watched him, and I knew Nora hadn't been wrong about him. He was steady, and he was good, and he loved her in the direct, uncomplicated way that she deserved. And whatever I'd been carrying for 6 years, it hadn't been something that could have given her that. I sat in the second-to-last pew on the left side, and I watched my best friend get married. I stayed for the reception. I danced with her once, to something slow they played after dinner, and we didn't say anything because we'd already said what we needed to say behind the chapel. She looked at me once in the middle of the song, and I looked back, and that was all. Marcus found me at the bar afterward. He shook my hand. He said, "She talks about you, you know. Has for years. I'm glad you came." I told him I was glad too. Both of us probably still telling the truth. I drove 4 hours home that night. Different playlist. I made a new one somewhere around Chattanooga, pulling over in a rest stop to do it because it felt like something that needed to happen. I don't know exactly what I was doing. Closing something. Or maybe just marking the difference between the drive there and the drive back. She called me 6 weeks later on a Sunday afternoon, same as she always had, about nothing specific. Her new apartment, a funny thing that had happened at work. Had I seen that article about the thing we'd both been following? Normal call, the kind we'd always had. Except this time I could hear myself in it differently. Not the man who'd been waiting for something to shift, just the person on the other end of the phone who was glad she'd called. The following spring, I met someone at a faculty event. A woman named Petra, who taught English at the high school 2 districts over and had strong opinions about the Oxford comma and laughed at things that were actually funny rather than things she thought she was supposed to laugh at. I didn't wait 6 years. I told her on the third date that I liked her. Out loud, directly, like a person with basic communication skills. She said she liked me too. It turned out to be that simple. I've thought a lot about what Nora said behind that chapel. About staying. About not disappearing. I thought it was about her when she said it, about her needing me not to vanish from her life. But I've come to think it was about me just as much. I've been ready to make a clean cut, delete the number, drive home and close a door, and call it protecting myself. And she'd knocked on a car window and said, "Don't." Not because of what she felt, because of what she knew I'd been about to do to myself. Some people love you by telling you the thing you need to hear. Some people love you by showing up at a hospital without being asked. Some people love you by pausing a wedding ceremony for 5 minutes and walking around the side of a chapel to make sure you don't disappear. Nora Whitfield has loved me in all 3 ways, at different times, in different forms. I spent 6 years not saying a word about it. I spent one afternoon in Georgia finally understanding what it was. It wasn't unrequited. It was just for a different life, one that belonged to someone else. And letting it be that, cleanly and without resentment, was the thing I'd been driving toward without knowing it. I still stop at the gas station outside Cookeville. I still buy the terrible coffee. I think of her every time. The way you think of someone who has been important to you in a way that doesn't fit into any of the usual boxes. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just is. That's what I drove 4 hours to find out. To everyone who stayed with me through this one, I mean that differently than I usually do. This one asked something of you, and you gave it. If you've ever loved someone quietly for longer than was good for you, and then finally let it become something you could carry without it carrying you, leave a comment. Tell me where you are now, not where you were, where you are. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Share it with someone who's been driving somewhere for years and hasn't figured out yet what they're going toward. And if you're still in the parking lot with the keys in your hand, go back in. Find your seat. Stay for the ceremony. What's waiting for you on the other side of it might surprise you.